Yo, interwebs. What's poppin'? It's your boy Christian, host of Berean Talk, coming at you with another edition to the Berean Talk show, man. I know I've been gone for a minute, but we out here still. Anyways, today I'm coming at you with a new video on a very, how should we say, taboo subject. On racism. I know, it's an elephant in the room. And there's a lot of questions running through your head. So here's what I'm going to need some of you guys to do as a preparation before this video. Number one, I'm going to need all the conservatives watching this, which is probably most of you, being that I don't have a lot of subscribers right now. I'm going to need you guys to not think that I'm some liberal, racist, divisive warmonger who thinks that all white people are the devils and black people can do no wrong and, you know, whatever other craziness you can think of. And now, whatever liberals happen to be watching, I'm going to need you to get out of your heads that I'm some sort of naive, colorblind sellout who believes that racism ended in the 60s. Okay? But in this episode and in this new series, which is Christian Nation, or it's Christian Nation with a question mark, so it should be Christian Nation? I guess that's how you say it, right? Anyways, we're going to be talking about some very important things about this nation's history. And if this is a Christian nation, let's deal with some of the not so Christian parts. And maybe we'll see that maybe this wasn't the utopia that most people claim it to be. We're going to talk about slavery today. We're going to talk about racism, and we're going to talk about a whole bunch of other things that are going to make you really uncomfortable. But I believe as the body of Messiah, it is important for us to discuss them. So, let me grab this. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to talk.
You will not be able to stay home, brother. You will not be able to plug in, turn on, and cop out. You will not be able to lose yourself on Skag and skip out for beer during commercials because the revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be brought to you by Xerox in 4 parts without commercial interruptions. The revolution will not show you pictures of Nixon blowing a bugle and leading a charge by John Mitchell, General Abrams, and Spyro Agnew.
All right. So like I said, the next few videos, I wouldn't even say the next few videos, but the videos that are within the series are going to be, I think, extremely uncomfortable and unsettling, but it's important, especially for my people on the vanilla side of the melanin spectrum. And as far as racism goes, it's a really hot topic right now, and it's unavoidable even if you did live under a rock. That's just the case. And unfortunately, in the evangelical community, this topic of racism and the history of oppression in our nation has become an elephant in the room, especially in the evangelical community, that no one wants to deal with, and in some cases, claiming it doesn't even exist. But guess what? As far as this elephant in the room goes, your boy's about to deal with it. All right? So let's get going on this little journey we got. And before, and let me backtrack a little bit, because before we get started, I know a lot of you have probably maybe this one question, maybe a lot of questions. But this one question you probably have is, of all the things that this dude could have talked about the end times, could have talked about how great our president is, could have talked about the fact that his shirt is goofy, but he has to talk about racism. Why? That's an excellent question, viewer. And I believe that as the Berean Talk community, it is my obligation to be honest with you all, and it is my obligation to be transparent and for us to grow closer together. Humility is a godly attribute that I think I need to have, so I need to confess something to you all. And it's really hard for me to do. I'm black.
Word.
And after many people that I've come in contact with, talked to family members, I've talked to friends. Turns out, not only did I grow up black, I was born black. Can you believe it? So in case you're wondering why this topic is significant to me, that's why. Now, all jokes aside, yes, that is why this topic holds a significant amount of, significance to me and my family and everybody else that looks like me that lives in this nation. However, what does that have to do with the Bible? Again, let's go back to that fundamental question that we asked in a video I did a little while back. What is sin? In that video, we asked, we need to ask ourselves questions about maybe even the most fundamental things about our faith, because sometimes we realize we don't even have the answer. Most people would say that the Jim Crow laws and slavery and lynching in the KKK were bad. And the reason I say most is because I live in the South, I live in North Carolina, and I've seen enough t-shirts, bumper stickers, and talked to enough people to know that there are plenty of other people that would think otherwise. Shocker, I know. But the fact of the matter is, we always have to ask, what does this have to do with the Bible? Because feelings don't matter at the end of the day. And that's an excellent question. What does this have to do with the Bible? But again, as far as the Bible goes, I have proper grammar. I graduated from high school. It's okay. But as far as the Bible goes, a lot of people, especially if you ask specifically in the evangelical community, ask them specifically, why was slavery, why were all of these horrible things that were done in our Christian nation's history, why were they so bad? No one can really give me a straight answer. And I've asked this question before. No one can point to certain scriptures except for maybe the love your neighbor as yourself. But other than that, no one can really give a definitive answer. In fact, there are scriptures in the Bible where God instructs the Israelites on how to attain and keep and treat their slaves. I guess as far as, this little trip we're going on, ladies and gentlemen, we sprung a couple of leaks in our theological boat here. Because if on one hand, God says that this particular thing is permissible, and then on the other hand, later in our nation's history, we abolish said thing that's permissible in the scriptures, then that means somebody's wrong here, right? And maybe there's a misinterpretation of the scriptures. In fact, the scriptures are so blatant about slavery, there's even scriptures that say slaves shall obey their masters. That was a favorite scripture of many southern white slave owners, so much to the point where they would force their slave preachers to make sure to preach that every sermon to their slaves. Well, apparently Nat Turner didn't get the memo. But they did that in order to keep us in an oppressed system that was godless to begin with. And that's what we're going to delve into right now, because this is going to be a cumulative, not only study, but conversation we're going to have. Because at the end of the day, if you don't have enough information to have the conversation, then we just won't have the conversation. Period. Now, here's the thing, as far as slavery goes in the Bible. There were some very specific stipulations on how one attained a slave and kept a slave and how long you should even have a slave in the Bible, right? So here's what I need to tell you all. You ready? The slavery of African Americans, or not African Americans, but just Africans in the United States, and then the slavery of other Hebrews or other nations that was permitted in the scriptures, is not the same thing. Let me repeat that. The slavery between Africans and the slavery between other nations among Hebrews and everything else is not the same thing. Okay? I'm going to repeat it for the people in the back and in the balcony if you didn't hear me. It's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. Turn to your neighbor and say, calm down, Christian. Calm down. It's just the interwebs. It's okay. It's not the same thing. okay? And I'm going to tell you why. Because I'm not going to read all the scriptures under which under which God says you can have a slave, right? Because there's a lot of them and there's a lot of different stipulations, and the video would be 45 minutes long. But I will give the principles to you, and I'll give the scriptures right down here. You can look them up yourself. But there's two ways you became a slave in the nation of Israel. Number one, you owed somebody money, which means if I have a credit card and I owe Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over here 12,000 shekels.
Wait. You gonna use Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego?
Why not? Apparently he has a problem with my name choice. We'll say Bob.
Franklin, Barry, and Bob.
Franklin? Okay, that's not a Hebrew name, but let's say I owe Franklin 12,000 shekels.
Oh, using Hebrew names.
Good grief, shut up! Let's say I owe Franklin over here 12,000 shekels, right? And the deadline for all of my money to be paid back has come. I can't pay it off. And I have no money to pay him. So what do? I say that we draw up a contract and we make an agreement that I will become Franklin's servant for X amount of years until the debt is paid off in labor or whatever the case is. Okay, that's one way. Number two, it's number one. Number two, prisoner of war, which means when Israel went to war with all these different nations after they crossed the Jordan, and before that, but especially after they crossed the Jordan into the land of Canaan and fought the Philistines and fought the Canaanites, they were taking people as slaves who were fighting them and said, I would rather be taken alive. Period. That's great, okay? That's fine. But here's the problem. Number one, Africans at the time, people in Ghana, people in Nairobi, people in Benin, people in wherever in Africa the slaves were taken. Number one, we didn't owe England, Portugal, Spain, France. We didn't owe anybody any money. Number two, we didn't go to war with them. So biblically, what is that called? Involuntary servitude, or stealing of a human being. It's called kidnapping. Ladies and gentlemen, kidnapping. And there's a lot of things that we love to get worked up about as evangelicals. In the last video, I talked about leaving the homosexuals alone, that we love to always talk about how somebody should be stoned to death for something, right? Well, let's look and see what happens when you kidnap someone. Shall we? Deuteronomy 24:7. If a man be found stealing any of his brethren of the children of Israel, and maketh merchandise of him, or selleth him, then that thief shall die, and thou shalt put evil away from among you. Now, I understand that some of you might be thinking, well, number one, that was for Israel, or whatever the case is. For those of you that might be really in depth with your theological studies or your hermeneutics or whatever the case is. But the fact of the matter is that verse entails that stealing anyone, even though he was talking to Israel, stealing anyone is kidnapping. Involuntary taking of someone and forcing them to work somewhere is called kidnapping. Okay? Number two, what we did as African slaves, and then the DOSs that came afterwards, the descendants of slaves, which is what I am, which is what my brother is. By the way, if y'all didn't know, he's black too.
Word.
My mother's black and my father's black, okay? We're descendants of slaves. And the second thing is we worked for nada. In the scriptures, that's called defrauding of wages. And just in case you don't understand the magnitude of the defrauding of wages, by the year 1861, and there are many sources for this, but the source that I will give for you guys to look up. I'll put it in the description. But by the year 1861, which is the start of the Civil War, the South produced 75% of the world's cotton. Now, let's remember, number one, more than 90% of the cotton in the United States was being picked by slaves. Number two, we weren't getting paid anything. Number three, that's just one of the South's biggest exports. You also have tobacco and you have sugarcane. And then there was all the other things that we did for no money. And what we got in return was murder, rape, other forms of terrorism, and theft by individuals, race mobs, the Ku Klux Klan, as well as the United States government itself. Now you might be saying to yourself, and here's the most here's the problem that I have with a lot of evangelicals, is that you use the, I'm not even gonna say evangelicals in general, usually it's white evangelicals that say things like this. You say things like, well, we shouldn't talk about this because it's in the past and it was dealt with through the Civil War. Actually, wasn't dealt with through the Civil War, and we're going to talk about that in another video. But no, we shouldn't talk about this because it's in the past and it's ugly. Or, you know, maybe you feel guilty because there's probably a high chance that someone in your lineage or someone that you know of, as far as in your family or maybe outside of your family or close friend or something like that, either had slaves or benefited from some sort of racial injustice and or oppression, which is condemned in the scriptures, right? And we should move on and we should forget the past. Well, here's the thing about that. You guys don't do that yourselves. Now you say that we should focus on maybe the good things in history, right? Right? You only want to focus on the good things in history, which isn't true because you focus on a lot of horrible events. You want to focus on the good things in history. Number one, here's the thing about this nation, and when I say Christian nation question mark, it's because this country was supposedly founded, the Declaration of Independence, let's say. Our nation has declared its independence in the year July 4th, 1776. That's the date, right? In that declaration, the statement, all men are created equal and endowed to certain rights. I hope I'm quoting this correctly. I may not be. And that they have certain inalienable rights that shall not be infringed upon. That's the gist of it, okay? That's written 1776. But slavery in the United States began August 20th, 1619. So you're telling me that because by the year 1861, my people were producing 75% of one of the most valuable materials known to mankind and making you money, right? And being enslaved like chattel, ergo the term chattel slavery, in order for this country to grow and be this awesome nation filled with Judeo-Christian values, right? It's interesting. And here's the funnier thing about it. I wouldn't say funnier, but the more disturbing thing about it is that meanwhile, during all the bloodshed of my ancestors, the lynching and everything else and all the terrorism I talked about earlier, 1776 comes around. Oh, everybody's free. They got certain rights. Everyone's a man. But slavery doesn't end until 1865, the date of which, when it's officially known throughout the United States that all slaves are made free because Union soldiers had to force the southern states to let our ancestors free. That date is June 19th, 1865, otherwise known as Juneteenth, which is a day celebrated by African Americans. Not everybody, a lot of us don't even know about it. I just found out about it within, I want to say, the last 5 years. I haven't always known about it. We don't talk about Juneteenth, though, because it's an ugly splotch in our history, right? And I wouldn't even say it's the ugly splotch in our history. It's the foundation for this nation's history. And back to what I said about the whole, we focus on the good things. We don't in this nation, especially when it comes to white history, because I can guarantee you more people know about the horrific events that happened or occurred during the Boston Massacre than they do about, let's say, the John Brown Revolution, the Nat Turner Revolution. But that's the way that this thing has been designed. Even now, you people say that, oh, we should get over it and focus on the good things. And, stop focusing on past events that have been dealt with. Well, here's the thing. September 11th, 2001, the hashtag for 9/11 is hashtag never forget. Despite the fact that, number one, the guy who supposedly was responsible for it, Osama bin Laden, he's dead. And number two, you started a whole war over it. And number three, at this point, depends on when you're watching it, but at this point in time in history right now when I'm recording this, that's 17 years ago. Why don't you get over it? Of course, you don't want to do that because it makes you uncomfortable. The scriptures say in Habakkuk 2:12, let's read that real quick. Woe to him that buildeth a town with blood and establish a city by iniquity. That version, it says iniquity, but there are other translations that say injustice. And ladies and gentlemen, I don't care how you cut the American pie, this nation was founded on the shedding of innocent blood, brings me back to Proverbs 6, which is one of the things that God hates, and injustice, which often includes other things that God hates, which is feet that are quick to rush into evil, and a false witness that tells lies, and one who causes discord among the brethren, and all of these different things. So you're telling me that I should bow down or be grateful to this nation because of all of these different values I'm, able to have in this country and all the opportunities, but yet it's founded on things that God hates. Let me tell you something. This is how, and as you do your research into Black history, you'll see the atrocities and the horrific history that I have come from, that many people that look like me have come from. Here's the most ridiculous thing that I've heard. I've had many conversations with people on this topic, especially within the past year. And I'm going to make a list. Let's make a list for Berean Talk. But this is arguable. No, not even arguably. This is the top 10 on the top 10 list of the most ridiculous, asinine things I have ever heard in my life. And I was talking with someone on social media, and we were talking about General Robert E. Lee and, who he was as a person, whatever the case is, and slavery came up and a bunch of other things. At the end of the conversation, mind you, this is a believer. We're not talking about somebody out on the street just doing whatever. This is a blood-washed, Bible-following believer who tells me, and I'm paraphrasing, but this was the gist of what this person said to me, that Christian, you should be grateful that your people were enslaved, because now you're able to be born in a society where you can get a job and you can have a nice house and you can get insurance and healthcare, because you wouldn't be able to do that in Africa. Now let that marinate. A believer, Christ-following believer, Bible-following believer tells me that I should be grateful that her ancestors kidnapped mine and brutalized and murdered and raped and terrorized them for 400 years because I'm able to get a car now. That's disgusting. Ladies and gentlemen, there's no other way to put that. That's disgusting. And there's so many people that think like that, and you think that we're supposed to just be okay with it. You want to quote scriptures that say turn the other cheek, right? And when black people go and do these different protests or even revolutions throughout history, you say that turn the other cheek. We should turn the other cheek. But yet you're on the front lines of fighting for your Second Amendment rights. So please explain to me which side you're on. Ladies and gentlemen, that doesn't make sense. And what I'm doing here is, number one, I am angry, as far as you can tell. I am very frustrated. But also, you can see the hypocrisy in how many Americans conduct themselves. And then we're going to also dig deeper into the wickedness that this country was founded on, because we act like here's America, and here's this little black spot here, which was slavery. It's more like America is a house, and the very foundation it's built on is the dead bodies of my ancestors who not only worked for you, but they fought for you in your wars. They picked your cotton. They did all these different things. They built your universities and built your colleges. And when someone stands up and says, enough is enough because I serve a God of righteousness and justice, and you tell them to be quiet and turn the other cheek, there's a problem. So, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate you tuning in to this edition of Berean Talk, and I hope that you enjoyed the video, but I also hope that this is thought-provoking. I also hope that this provokes conversation, not necessarily arguments, but conversation, and that it also provokes research. And throughout this series, because this is just the first of many, but throughout this series, we're going to delve deeper. I'm going to delve deeper as far as my own personal historical and biblical study into this topic, and we're going to have to deal with some things. Because, ladies and gentlemen, all of the things that I've talked about earlier, it didn't stop. And what is our obligation as believers? What is our response to that? Again, I hope you guys enjoyed. And I know maybe some of you guys are upset and angry or whatever the case is. If you are, sorry, I was about to say something really sarcastic. I'm not going to do that. If you have comments or would like to send me messages or whatever, you can follow me on Instagram, follow me on Facebook, follow the Berean Talk Facebook page, and I will be much more active on social media as well as on YouTube and the other interwebs. And I leave you with all the other encouraging and uplifting cliches that you leave at the end of other YouTube videos. And until my next appearance on the interwebs, ladies and gents, peaces and blessings. We out.